All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Evernest Real Estate Investor Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Spencer Sutton, and I have with me today, Gray Hall. Gray, welcome back to the show, man.
It only took 3 tries for you to get that right, so I'm proud of you.
Can you believe, like, the thing that I have memorized the most I could do in my sleep, I screwed it up twice in a row.
I was about to compliment you that, you're just kind of automatic. Literally, that was going through my head before you had those 2 fallouts. But yeah, excited to be back. Always love doing these highlight of the week to talk about investing, help some investors out.
It's always good to, I was just sitting here thinking about that, like just doing these podcasts, recording videos or whatever, the more reps, like you do get a little bit better. So it's just,
and you had a lot of room to improve. So, you've come a long way. It's kind of beginner's luck.
One of the funniest stories is I had Matthew in front of a camera and he had just knocked out 3 videos, one after the other. He was doing great. And then he started bragging. He's like, "Hey, I'm one take, Tommy. I'm one take." And literally the next take he couldn't get, it was like 10 different tries. It was hilarious. So
good.
Pride.
He needs that. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Pride, downfall.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, good. Let's get into the show today. So, Gray, we were sitting here talking before we got on, and we were just talking about buying and managing rental property. And, as much as people love this, and we were actually talking about even first-time people, like people who are doing it for the first time, like they're looking for certainty. Hey, is this a good deal? Is it not a good deal? And so we did want to talk today. We thought about like the 5 most difficult things about buying and managing rental property that we think everybody should know.
Passive income can be a myth. I think real estate is sold as kind of mailbox money. And I think you've got to have really good system. I think it takes a lot to get there. Mm-hmm. And so where I've seen, first time investors kind of get discouraged or frustrated is when things happen, something breaks, there's an issue with the tenant. And you really kind of got to step back, have that long-term mindset. Hey, I'm paying down this much debt per month. Hey, we budgeted for maintenance. Like this is going to be okay. We budgeted for vacancy, et cetera. Look, there's a lot of things, and especially if you try to do kind of everything yourself, that's why we talk about surrounding yourself with a great team. There's a lot of hard things about real estate. And so, kind of wanted to talk through 5 of those. I think it just helps put you in the right, frame of mind when you're thinking about building this portfolio. I think it can sound really sexy. It is a really good kind of slow way to build wealth. And I think it is probably the best, like risk adjusted way to build wealth. But there are challenges that come with it and there are headaches. So being prepared for those, thinking through them, getting, prepared emotionally for it, but also having kind of the resources and the systems help make them a lot easier. And that's what you want to do at the end of the day, systematize this and run it as a business, and you're going to have a much better experience.
Yeah. I think what you said is spot on, because it is so much about getting that mindset of what you're about to do and this long-term mindset. And there are going to be things that happen. So just be prepared for it. And then you'll probably have a lot better reaction to it. I know that when I bought my first rentals back in 2005 for myself, I was thinking mailbox money. And because I was in the market all the time, like I was driving around these houses and doing that, I was like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. But I also learned the hard way that, before I gave my properties to Evernest in 2008 or 2009, that, a lot can go wrong. And so I learned some of this stuff the hard way. So let's dig into these. Let's start off with number 1. And I think for everybody starting out building their rental portfolio, this is probably the biggest hurdle that they need to get over first. So let's talk about this one, Gray.
Yeah, I think finding great deals. And like this changes in different markets. We're in a really competitive market right now. Previously it wasn't. And I think kind of breaking down, like, what is a great deal? Because I think that's something investors struggle with. I mentioned on another podcast that my brother's buying a rental house, calling me and kind of, hey, is this a good deal? Like, should I buy this? And so one of the hard parts for, anybody else to really answer is, hey, there's a lot of different criteria. Some people want to just cover their expenses and want appreciation, and that's a great deal to them. The investor who's looking to replace their W-2 income with cash flow, that would not be a good deal to them. And they're looking for different criteria. So we talk a lot about knowing your criteria. I think talking with other investors about, hey, these are my goals. Given my goals, will this help me to get there? And so I think that's kind of like the first step to remember is like a great deal is different to, a lot of different people.
And so probably even different avenues of finding those deals. Like you're going to be looking in different places, right? Depending on your strategy, right? So you may say, hey, if it's appreciation I want, and if it's, I'm thinking long-term, I don't need any kind of cash flow. Maybe you're going to look in the A and B class neighborhoods. And then maybe if you want a little bit more cash flow, you'll dip down into the C and D.
Yeah, totally. So I think kind of bouncing it off other people. Hey, what's realistic for the market? So talk to somebody who's buying a lot of properties. There's either an investor themselves or is kind of on the front lines buying that and say, hey, is this realistic? So if you come right now and you say, hey, in Jackson, Mississippi, I want a 14 cap, like you're not going to find that. So it kind of helps adjust expectations. But if you're like, hey, I want a 7 cap, like, okay, hey, we can do kind of business there. And I think the other thing too is like having really specific criteria. So I think that there's like, we work with a lot of investors. I've seen some do it really well and some do it not well. So I think like the pro tips are when you're working with an agent or a wholesaler or somebody, give them crystal clear criteria. And we talk a lot about kind of focusing in on one property type. So we're not saying to not buy deals, but if you're open to commercial and multifamily and retail and single family and Airbnb, like you're probably not going to get very far. And also if you give that to an agent, say, hey, go out and help me find these deals, they might not be an expert in all of those. And it's just kind of like, it's hard for them to be really focused. And so I would say, hey, pick 2. If it's like, hey, I'm looking for a multifamily 2 to 4 units up to $300,000. I want it to be at a 6 cap and 2 bedroom, 1 bath, minimum 1950. Like you're going to have a lot more success if you get in front of enough people and tell them you kind of want that criteria. And then, hey, single family, I'm up to 300K and I need this type of rent. And so kind of like once you define, talk to other people, know the market, what is a good return, and then giving that to the agent as is typically going to yield you the best fruit, and you're going to become a better client, for the agent. And like the best clients, the people who are easy to work with have very clear criteria. They're going to act on the deals because they know it themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And if you're a local investor, let's say you're not investing out of state, just the key to finding great deals is just getting out in the market, is meeting as many investors as you possibly can, as many wholesalers as you possibly can, driving neighborhoods. If that's something that you have the time to do, then you're going to want to drive neighborhoods. You're going to want to write addresses down. I mean, you are just, it really is a game of patience, and you just have to keep at it. You can't give up. It's like this game of endurance. And if you don't have the endurance, then you're not going to find a deal. So to me, like starting out, getting over this first hump of finding a great deal, again, depending on what you consider a great deal based on your goals, is hurdle number 1. It's probably the first difficult hurdle to get over.
Yeah. Like once you buy that first, like it's just a lot to walk through. Like, hey, what is, loan, what are the interest rates right now? And should I buy down the loan? And should I get a home warranty? And what is this inspection? So like getting reps and going through that and kind of knowing, hey, this is a base hit deal. This is a home run deal, and being okay with the base hit. Like the people who are waiting for that home run deal might be 3 or 4 years down the road before they actually buy one. So, be very clear with what you want, tell people what you want, follow up with them, and then be ready to act when there is that first deal.
Yeah, we were just talking, speaking of home runs or just hitting singles, we were talking about an investor recently, and just the fact that they have this long-term, like they started, of course, it would be great to start in 2008 and 2009 when the market was crashing.
The glory days, yeah.
Yeah, the glory days, but they started kind of back then, and they just like methodically would just buy houses every so often, just buy houses. They were just super patient. They weren't trying to buy 20 and 30 rental houses at one time. They weren't looking for packages. They were just like, you know what, we can do this. And so I think that's a good way to go about it.
Yeah.
All right. Second most difficult thing about buying and managing rental property, Gray, what is it?
Managing a rehab crew. And this really applies. So if you're buying a vacant house, unless it's just been rehabbed, you're going to have some level of work, especially if you want to maximize rents. And I mean, that was my strategy. Like get in there, bring it to the top of market so you can get the best quality tenants and you can get the highest amount of rent, and you put a lot of the expenses up front. But man, it's tough to manage a rehab crew. I think just finding a rehab crew, if you don't have a network, I think that's really challenging. And then 2, especially if you're out of state. I mean, I've just heard too many horror stories of people finding somebody on Craigslist or even another referral, and things take way longer. They cost way more. Worst case, you pay for some money, you pay them some money, and then work never gets done. You got to kind of chase that down. And so I think it kind of ranges from, hey, what is the scope? What actually needs to be done? And not asking your contractor that. I read a quote the other day, never ask your barber if they need a haircut. And so I think you can lean on them for some of that, but you've also got to have other people in your corner that you can ask, like, hey, do I need to upgrade this granite to this certain level, or do I need to put this type of appliance in there? And then I think it's being on site, at least, pretty frequently is a very important thing, because I was rehabbing a house and I went in a day after they did something, and luckily I caught it. So they textured the walls, which they were not supposed to do. That puts it in the 1980s property, but catching that quickly was, because I was on the job site.
Right.
So if you don't have kind of boots in the ground who are staying in good contact, or if you don't have a contractor who's able to send you those updates and have really good communication, that can give you some brain damage, and look, it costs you vacancy. So the longer you might miss the summer, if it goes 2 months too long, you might miss the best leasing season.
Yeah. We have all heard horror stories. We've had several of those. Like, we've taken over in Birmingham properties where people tried to do this from out of state, and it just imploded. It was a horrible experience. So you want to be careful. So Greg, let me ask you this question, because I was thinking about some of the investors who reach out to us, and they say, so in the comments, they may tell your team, some of your agents that are finding houses for them, find me a house that doesn't need a lot of work to it. So what are your thoughts about it? I mean, is that even possible, or like what kind of advice do you give that person?
Yeah. And I think we get a lot of investors, and look, it makes a lot of sense, especially if, hey, you've only got, $40,000 of capital. And so, that can buy you at 25% down, probably somewhere in the kind of mid ones. So they might not have the capital to do it, but it also might be from a desire. So yeah, I think that you can find properties. I think just knowing that there's kind of like this risk reward spectrum. And so the properties that need a lot of work, you're taking on the risk of managing the contractor, of repairs going over budget, of the vacancy. Mm-hmm. Your return should be higher than if you just bought the turnkey property and you could put a tenant in there. So, and I think there's kind of two categories. One is like, hey, it's not updated, but it's clean and functional, and can I put a tenant in there? And so that's like one strategy. The other is like either a new build or a recent build, maybe in the past 10 years that doesn't need a lot of work, and just looking out for major systems there. So it is possible, but you're probably going to pay market prices, or maybe slightly above, quote unquote, in this market environment. And that can tend to make your returns go lower. And so if you can find kind of that, everybody's looking for that kind of happy medium where you're getting a brand new house and you still get market rents. And so, but yeah, I think a lot of people, it makes a lot of sense. And I'd probably recommend that. I mean, I tell a lot of investors, like, be very careful of taking on a $50,000 rehab on your first project, because you got a lot of capital wrapped up into it. It's a hard thing to do unless you've kind of done it a lot, or if you've got really trusted partners. And like, the more that you do it, so I'd say start small, start with a $5,000 rehab, pick out the flooring, change out a couple things, see how it goes, and you kind of build up over time. And that's typically the transition that we see most successful people make, is they start with, closer to turnkey, and then they kind of build up with their confidence and their skill set.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I was just thinking of a buddy of mine here in town who has done hundreds of deals, and he loves foundation issues because he knows he's going to be one of the only ones that wants that house. He's like, the worse the foundation, the better. And just because he's done it, he's fixed so many foundations and flipped so many houses.
He's got a competitive advantage because he has the experience. And like, foundation's a scary thing, where if you go out there, because it can be really expensive. Some of them can be unrepairable. And so, look, that guy's got a lot of experience. He probably didn't first, start out his first house buying a foundation issue house.
Nope, he sure didn't. So you don't either. Whoever's listening. All right. So good. So those are the first two. The third one is the third of the 5 most difficult things about buying and managing rental property really is showing these properties. That was one of I was, thinking back to some of my very first houses, and where I live and where my rental property was typically 30 minutes away, 35 minutes away. It was a long interstate drive, and it's hard to here at Evernest, we used to do like a group showing, like, hey, show up at 3:00. Anybody who wants to see the property, we're going to be there from 3 to 3:30. Well, I wasn't doing that back then. And so I was just having to drive and do one-offs because it's hard to group people. And I'm telling you, that is the most frustrating thing. And I think Matthew even mentioned it on maybe the last podcast. You tend to start lowering your criteria, or what you would, you know what, this isn't that big of a deal. They don't make the criteria, but I'm tired of driving out here. To me, this was just a big, just pain in the butt, actually.
Yeah. Either you lower your criteria or you start having to cater. And so you've had 6 people, you've driven 45 minutes each time. They've said no. You got somebody who reaches out, hey, can I come see you at 7:00 right in the middle of dinner or time with the kids? And you're like, well, I got to get this lease. And so it's going to have an effect on you. And so like, start out valuing your time, that your time is higher return than doing that. Because it's just also a super big inconvenience. Like I leased a property and it was like a mile away and it was still a pain, still driving over there. It might take 20 or 30 minutes. Somebody doesn't show up. You're still waiting around there. So I think it's kind of like, that can be a huge kind of pain. In a hot market, maybe you get lucky in the first 10, it's great. But in our experience, that has not been the case. And so kind of plan for 30 days to be driving over the property. There's, at least not to my knowledge, there's not a lot of tech for kind of remote showings for individual landlords. That there might be some stuff out there. I just wouldn't feel comfortable even giving a lockbox code to somebody where you don't have their information. So that's just kind of a big risk, and wouldn't want kind of that wearing on you to lead you to do something that could cause damage to your house.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And so it's definitely an inconvenience, and if you can find ways around it, it's a lot better than going out there.
And one other kind of tip, if you are going to lease it yourself, what I've seen work really well is like scheduling an open house or a group showing. It's really challenging if it's tenant occupied because you got to line up a couple people's schedules. But giving the tenants notice and saying, hey, on Saturday from 12 to 4, what you get is, hey, it's an open window. People can come in there. They can schedule with you. I've also seen this kind of sense of competition when there's like a shorter window and you start to see other people and you say, oh crap, 30 people showed up. Let me put my application in. So kind of trying to group that in there. It works in some markets and not in others, but I would try as much as possible if you are going to do it to kind of group that together. Maybe do it on a weekend. That's when we typically see the most leasing activity, either weekends and evenings. And so a lot of people got jobs, and so they might not be going during the day. So that may be convenient for you, but scheduling those times is going to be your best bet to place a tenant quickly.
Yeah, I'd say also another tip is just to make sure before you show that property that it is completely ready to be shown. So I don't mind people coming in my house if I've got some mess around or, whatever. So I have friends or people come over, but when you're trying to rent a house, you want it to look like, you want it to be clean. You want it to be spotless. You don't want things to not be working, because these applicants will walk around and like just test things out. And if things are out of place, or if they're broken, they're not working properly, guess what? They're going to think in the back of their mind, well, this person's not going to take care of this rental, and they will not fill out that application. Also, make sure you're priced right. That's going to be a frustrating thing to go and show a property a lot of times, just only to find out that you were, priced $150, $200 above market rent. So just a couple of tips if you're doing this. All right.
Yep. All right.
Number 4.
Next one.
This is a big one here. Gray, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just managing tenant expectations. Like if you're managing properties yourself, when there's an issue, they're going to call you. When there's anything going on in the house, and I think this applies to kind of the next one, like on talking about maintenance, but managing tenant expectations. So if there's collection issues, you're the one following up, making sure that gets handled. If you're in an HOA and you get a yard notice, so you've got to have all that communication. So be prepared. Some tenants are super easy and, nothing kind of goes on, but other tenants can be super needy, and there requires a lot of communication. So I think be prepared for that. And that tends to come in waves in my experience, where you'll have a lot of stuff coming at one time. And then nothing kind of falls, it kind of falls off for a little bit, and you start thinking, hey, this rental thing's awesome, until the next thing kind of pops up. But yeah, I think just setting expectations, like my advice would be to treat this as a business, have a business email that they do, try to avoid kind of going through text, like set it up in a way where it's like, hey, you can contact me at this is where maintenance requests go. This is if you're having issues here. And then you also just don't want to get in the middle of if there's tenant drama. So we've had issues between, any number of tenants and hey, that's not our job. Y'all figure this out. If you got 3 roommates and there's an issue, like y'all figure this out, or if there's a couple or whatever else. So you're going to have to be in the middle of those if you're managing those yourself. And even sometimes with a property manager, like you're kind of brought in to make the decision, but a lot of the other stuff can, all of the other action steps can be taken by the property manager. So that's kind of the value that they add. And if there's a big decision that needs to be made, they can loop you in there.
Yeah. I think and when we say like managing tenant expectations, you need to have conversations with them on the front end. This is how things go. This is what needs to happen, because there are going to be things that come up. I'm just trying to think of some of the things that we see, Gray, from our residents. We have early termination notices, right? So we have people that say, hey, I'm getting moved for a job. So what are you going to do in that case? You need to understand what you're going to do, have that clearly communicated, probably in your lease. You have roommate swaps, like, oh, I want somebody to swap on this lease. Yep. So how are you going to handle that? There's lots of different things like that.
And expectations on maintenance. I mean, listing it out here, is it their responsibility to change out the filter, making that clear, telling them, making sure that they're holding them accountable, checking on that if you go to do some property checks. And then lawn care. I mean, there's all these other things that like, hey, the tenant needs to do. It needs to be clear in the lease. You need to communicate that up front because the lease can be pretty lengthy. So a lot of times what we do is kind of like not like a cheat sheet, but it's kind of like, hey, the top 10 things. I think we used to have that in our lease. It was kind of like the top 10 where we highlighted the most things, like no parking in the lawn. Hey, lawn care must be done from this time to this time, cut this many times a week. Air filter needs to be changed, et cetera, et cetera. And so, again, it comes with experience. So a lot of the things, it's kind of like, hey, you'll learn this and learn it with the next tenant. So you can kind of have that crash course, but be prepared to make mistakes on your first couple if you're self-managing or leveraging a property manager who's kind of been through this and kind of can help set those expectations and learn from their mistakes of and kind of expertise from managing properties for years.
Yeah, I just thought about that. It's like it's really interesting what residents will do if you don't expressly, like if you're not very clear and direct in telling them, hey, you can't do this. And I was just thinking about like parking on the lawn. Like just park. Oh, we're just pulling up in the yard and parking there, or their friends are, or whatever. It's like, gee whiz. Yeah.
Yep.
You'd be surprised. All right. So we saved the best for last. This is a big one. The biggest, probably the most difficult thing about buying and managing rental properties, Gray.
Maintenance. I was going to do a drum roll, but I figured it wouldn't come.
Where's our drum?
Yeah, exactly.
Whoever is like producing this, please put a drum roll in there.
Plug in the drum roll right there.
Yes,
maintenance can be the most frustrating thing. Look, nobody likes to have maintenance. Tenants don't like it. The owners don't like it. Nobody likes dealing with that. It's just a reality of managing a rental property. So unless you've got a brand new build, where there's a builder warranty for a year, like things break on houses, especially if you're buying 50 or 60-year-old houses. So when you're underwriting a deal, we talk about this, setting aside money in a separate account to be prepared for it. Mm-hmm. Maintenance can only be stressful, especially if you don't have the money to pay for it. That's like one of the ways to make it extremely, like even more stressful is like, hey, I wasn't prepared for this. And so in your underwriting, when you're buying it, make sure you're setting aside money. But look, maintenance, like it's challenging. So even identifying the problem sometimes. So I think the things you got to think through are, hey, where do tenants submit this? Did they troubleshoot? Can you get them to assist? Like you're going to be managing all this communication. Do you have a list of vendors? Because a general handyman's not going to be able to fix the HVAC stuff. And so I think a general handyman can fix a lot, but you've got to have robust vendors. And also in my experience, like this tends to happen at the most inconvenient times where you're at a wedding and you get a call at 8:00 at night and the sewer is backed up, or the HVAC is out, or the hot water here has gone out. And so I think just kind of being prepared for that. These are the times where it's super frustrating and it's kind of a sprint to get things fixed and finished and billed and invoiced and paid for. And then it kind of calms out again. But it's, nobody likes it. I mean, I had a friend who just bought a property, closed on it, and I think 2 days later, his tenant called him that water was flooding in the backyard. So it's just a nightmare call. Luckily, he had a plumber and got it fixed the same day. But those are the times when you're kind of questioning, like, hey, am I doing the right thing? So zooming out and just say, hey, this is part of it.
Yeah. And I think also if you are buying properties that are already occupied, I think the temptation is just to think that everything's kind of going okay. in the property without, hey, well, a resident's in there, I don't need to come and do a full inspection of the property or whatever. And so what happens is you don't know what's going on in that property. There could be major deferred maintenance issues, which then, in my experience and in our experience, turn into major problems down the road if they're not addressed. And some residents won't even tell you that things are going on because it's not that big of a deal to them after a while. But just be careful if you're buying occupied properties.
Yeah, it was. There's two types. I don't know if this is completely true, but there's two types of tenants. There's the one that tells you, hey, there's a crack in the crown molding, and there's the other tenant who's got a foot of water in the living room, and they say, oh, that's a pool. I'm not going to tell anybody about that. And so it's like you've got kind of those two ends of the spectrum. So the ones that can be dangerous are, hey, there was a leak, not reporting it, and that turns into a much bigger bill later. And so it goes back to setting expectations with tenants, but I also think like doing at least an annual property inspection whenever you go in the property to be able to catch those things. And look, some tenants just, not faulting that, they just might not be looking out for stuff. But if you're an experienced landlord, you might catch some of this stuff. That's kind of a red herring to, hey, there's a bigger problem going on and I need to go ahead and handle it now.
Yeah, this absolutely happened to me. I had a fantastic resident. She and her family were in this property for over 9 years, and we had a basement area, and they had like gym stuff down there, and it was kind of cluttered. So it wasn't something that was like people didn't go down there very often. And little small leak turned into like when they moved out, it was like, holy cow, this thing got out of hand, and obviously cost us a lot of money, but that is part of it. Got to be on top of it.
So yeah, have the right expectations, have the money for it, and then have the vendors or local boots on the ground who are ready to handle those. And the one reason that tenants will move out is if maintenance is not handled.
Yes. Yeah. We talked a little bit about that. I mean, the reasons why tenants move out is that poor communication. Like if you just keep avoiding them, you're not answering their emails, you're not calling them back, they're going to move out because of that. But maintenance is definitely a big one for sure.
Yep. What's up?
All right. Those are our 5 most difficult things about buying and managing rental property. And that is it for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode. If you haven't already, share this with a friend. Leave us a review on Apple iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. And I will say, like, we will come back and do a final episode on the Jackson house. We'll tell you what's been going on with the Jackson house and give you all the details and come with the final numbers when it is completely leased out. So we look forward to doing that. And we'll be back next week.